The business world is changing, and like it or not, there's no escaping the new normal. Join us today for another conversation with a small business. I'm Joel Slattis, and welcome to my podcast. Welcome to this week's episode of The New Normal. Today, I am talking with Michael McCann from McCann HR. Am I saying that right, by the way? Do you have a professional, you go by McCann HR Consulting, isn't that right?
That's correct. McCann HR Consulting.
Okay. So anyway, we're here with McCann HR Consulting. Michael is a friend of mine from San Jose. We've worked together a little bit here and there in the past, and I asked him to come on the show to talk about how the HR world is changing a little bit with coronavirus and the new normal. So again, welcome aboard, Michael. I appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joel. Glad to be with you.
Cool. So let's get right into it. First, why don't you tell us a little bit about McCann HR Consulting? What is it exactly that you do? Who's your core competency for your customers? And let's start with that.
Right. So McCann HR Consulting, I've been doing the consulting work for about 6.5 years. Before that, I had a number of years in corporate America. Last position was the senior director of HR for a company that had north and south of 1,000 employees. So I had the opportunity to move into doing consulting work. I wanted to do it for a number of reasons. I saw that there was an opportunity for it. I saw that there was a need for it. You know, there's a lot of companies that are big enough that they have HR needs, but they're not big enough that they have a dedicated HR consultant or a dedicated HR, I should say, employee on their payroll. So what I'm able to do, that's my core group of who I help, the smaller businesses. And I'm essentially able to offer them an HR department. So when I engage with them, I often start with, let's get an infrastructure together. And what I mean by an HR infrastructure is performance evaluation forms. You know, maybe companies don't have those that are small. Corrective action forms, a handbook, a critical component of the setup is getting a handbook in place, offer letters and those sorts of things.
Okay,
So,
that makes sense.
yeah.
So let me ask you a question. Are you still, since coronavirus started, are you still doing the same kinds of things that you used to do, or for HR, like to support your clients? Or would you say that to some extent, the business and what you've been doing for your clients has changed?
It's the same plus, I guess I would say it as. So I'm doing all of the stuff, similar stuff that I described, and other stuff that I can talk about, like helping the employers from hire to fire. That's essentially what I do, and everything in between. So I do that, plus I'm helping them understand the COVID-19 world. You know, what do employers need to do to be compliant with a bunch of new regulations and laws that have been put in place to help protect workers? You know, for instance, there's additional paid leave for employees if they get COVID-19. There's leave for employees that need to stay home because their kid can't go to school because the school's closed. There's requirements for, hey, I have an employee and he's COVID-19 positive. Now you need to follow a protocol, and including letting the other employees know, letting the county officials know, et cetera. You know, one other item on that is always companies were required to have an injury and illness prevention plan. They call it IIPP. And Cal OSHA's recently said that what needs to be added to the IIPP is a section on COVID-19 and how to prevent a safe environment if you have workers working on site.
Okay, so I like the way you explain that. It's the same plus, because there is some amount of, like, the rubber meets the road here. This is the stuff that you really do need to start to cover in your discussions with your clients that has to do with COVID-19. Like, these are all the new things, like actual things that need to happen or that you need to address. That makes a lot of sense. What would you say is the biggest concern that your clients have when they call you? Like they're calling you and it's COVID-19 era and people are going to be working from home and the whole way they run the company is sort of now up in the air. What is the biggest concern that you hear from your companies that you work with that need HR
Yeah.
consulting? What are they worried about?
So initially, when we were almost all working remotely, working, from our homes, it was, how do I do that? There was such a learning. Well, some companies have a bigger learning curve than others of getting the tech in place, the infrastructure to help them do that. And then from there, getting it in place. And, well, we've always done it this way, and I've always been able to go to this file in the office, and then that's not there now. So they had to really work through how to get it done. So getting that in place, and then managing the employee that's remote is quite different than managing an employee that you see in the office. So working with my clients and giving them guidance on how that should take place. Some got to the point where they were discouraged, where they didn't see the same type of production and same type of customer service, the same kind of performance that they used to see from their employees when they're working in the office. And they
What
said,
did you do to address that? Like, how do you address
yeah,
that?
yeah. And the initial idea that I had from a lot of the owners were, so we're going to have them back in the office. And so, I talked through that, and I said, first of all, can you do that? Can you do that per county regulations and per OSHA and Cal OSHA regulations, CDC recommendations, et cetera? I mean, can you actually do that? So if you make the decision that, yeah, I can, then what you want to say also is, well, do I really want to do this? What I would say is that number one, maybe take a look at how I can manage my employees differently so that they know that they have the same expectations that were in place when they're working in the office. So, saying, well, maybe that's not the solution, is having them come back in. One of the things, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on just in general in the United States. You have COVID-19, and you have election year that's not as usual as previous election years. You have a lot of strong feelings and a racial discussion that the country hasn't had in a long time in this intensity.
That's all bleeding over into the work that you're doing for your clients.
Exactly. And the economics. So you might have a worker who is employed, but her husband's laid off. I mean, so what
it's not COVID in a bubble. It's COVID plus the election. It's COVID plus the George Floyd fallout and the Black Lives Matter movement and all of those feelings, and it's all rolled up into one. So you're seeing all of that together at the same time. Was that a fair statement?
That is. And so what I press upon the owners, what I press upon management is to be empathetic. And, we've heard the saying, we're all in this together. So I'm able to offer that broader perspective. So they're involved in it in a manner of, I need the employees to be performing. And so they can get a frustration from that. I don't have the same frustration. So what I'm able to say is, take a look at it in a bigger picture.
Yeah, it's a blue sky day for you, basically, as opposed to them, which is why you would hire a consultant in the first place. Like one of the reasons you'd hire a consultant.
That's really one of the keys that I bring to my clients, being able to offer that perspective.
Okay. Anecdotally, what would be like the biggest problem that you've had to deal with from any one of like your customers? Of course, we're not naming names here, but what and COVID related specifically, like since you said that there's been trouble with productivity, there's been trouble with figuring out how to get employees to work the same way that they used to, maybe trouble with employers who want to bring their employees back prematurely because of those kinds of things. Is there like any one particular issue that sort of stands out in your mind as, yeah, this was a particularly vexing problem, but here's how we fixed it?
Yeah, there were several. I think the leaves of absence, the request for leaves, has been a challenge for the clients that I have, and then the ones that are working remotely, getting the performance standards from the employees that's required.
Probably have to rewrite all those performance standards because now they're no longer around. So you've got to figure out, well, how do I gauge an employee's work if they're not here for me to keep an eye on them? Now the only thing you probably see is, well, how many emails do they send in a day and how often are they on the phone? Are you guys relying more heavily on those kinds of metrics?
Yeah, it's precisely, that's one of the key things to do, is being able to look at the technology that we have. I mean, thank goodness that we have tech in place. I mean, I don't know exactly when the internet was created. I think it was whenever that was it in the 80s, in the 90s?
It's funny. I was as a kid when this is kind of a side story, but I mean, I had an email and instant messenger as early as 1985, but I had access to a scientific institution. It's kind of a long story. I was still 15. So it's been around for a long time. They didn't call it the internet back then. At the time it was called BitNet, and there might have been other stuff as well, but yeah, it's been around for a while, definitely.
Can you imagine if that infrastructure, the internet, et cetera, wasn't in place and this happened?
Oh yeah, it would be a different world. Yeah, well, you wouldn't be able to work. You would just have to, stay isolated and stay, Okay, well, that's interesting. Let me see if I have any more questions that I wanted to ask you. I'm just checking my list here. What would be the most important advice that you would give to an employer who is trying to sort of navigate the HR world in the era of COVID? They have employees working from home. They're not sure if they need to do anything or what they need to do. Like, what would be the most important thing that you would say to that employer in terms of advice? Like, this is the best thing you can do to sort of take care of your business during this time.
It's knowing the right questions to ask. And I think that it's important to look at compliance. And if it is that you could use some guidance, that's precisely what a consultant like myself does. In addition to that, there's, the publications that are available online, help the small businesses, other than working with an individual. One of the things I think that's going to be interesting is to see how things transpire when we're more able to work in the offices, on site. Are we going to be going back to that? I'm thinking that there's going to be a lot of people going back to the workplace. For me, there's nothing like in-person contact. And yes, there's a lot that can be done remotely. And yes, it does offer benefits, like traffic jams are down and easier to schedule. You don't have to factor the commute time, all those sorts of things. With that said, it's also nice to be in person.
Yeah, I can believe that. Have you? Oh, last question. Actually, I guess I have one more question. Actually, have you seen? When I'm sure when there's like HR problems, somebody gets sexually harassed, or somebody is having conflict with someone else in the business. I'm sure you probably hear about it. One of the first people, because the manager, I can imagine, or the owner gets on the phone and calls the HR person and says, "What's my exposure here? What do I need to do?" Have you seen a change in that sort of element of the business? I would imagine that there's probably a lot less of the sort of sexual harassment things going on because everybody's working from home. There's less opportunity for that, and more of the performance related calls and things like that. Maybe less injuries, maybe less of the people butting heads, and more of the how do I keep my employees, sort of doing what they're supposed to do. And I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm just guessing, like, is that what you've seen as well? Or that would be my prediction.
Yeah, there's more of the focus on how the employees are going to remain performing well so that the business is able to continue to operate as it needs to. But, when you mentioned the harassment, it's important for the small businesses to know that there's a deadline of the end of this year to get harassment training done a lot of people know that, and some have heard it and don't know exactly what it is. But it's, if you have 5 or more employees, you have to have your employees trained on harassment prevention.
They do that they have to get retrained every year?
Retrained every 2 years, yes.
Every 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I know we did it. I have to go back now and take a look. And when was that already? Did we do that? But I don't think it was 2 years ago. So I think we're good for a while, actually. I think
but you're right. The devil's in the detail, because you say, yeah, got that done. I got him trained. And then the other step is calendar it for 2 years.
2 years out,
yeah.
So you don't fall into the same trap, because yes, you
right.
forget. You forget. And then the next thing you know, you're in trouble and you haven't done the training in 3 years. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's good to know. It's good to know.
And put it as a part of your onboarding process for your new employees.
And making sure that you take care of it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Michael, hey, I really want to thank you for your time coming in and hanging out with us and the group, whoever's listening out there in internet land. And we appreciate it. If there's anybody out there in California who needs HR advice, I think you're good all up and down the state, right? You wouldn't be applicable to somebody like in Montana, though, right? If somebody in Montana called you and wanted advice on HR policy, you would probably say it's better if you call someone in Montana.
Yeah, less so. My wheelhouse is California. I have experience working with other states, Oregon, Washington, and Colorado, Nevada, et cetera. But more California is right in my wheelhouse.
Okay. Well, Mike, thanks for coming by. We appreciate it. And I'm sure one day we'll see you around when we're back to doing things in person.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot, Joel.
All righty. Have a good day.
Bye now.